Welcome to the Quiet Becoming. Tonight we enter the place within you that's always been watching from behind the veil. The part you've kept at a distance. The part that rises when you're tired, triggered, or trembling. You may think you know yourself, but Carl Jung warned us, everyone carries a shadow, and the less you see it, the darker it becomes. You probably won't survive pretending it's not there. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And share your location and local time in the comments. You're not alone in the night. Allow the noise to fade, the stillness to bloom, and together we'll begin. It follows you, whether you know it or not. In the small reactions, the flash of jealousy you can't explain, the self-sabotage that shows up right when things are going well, the hidden thrill you feel at someone else's failure, the way you withdraw when you're hurt, punish without words, lie even to yourself. You didn't plan it, you didn't want it, but it lives inside you just the same. Jung called this the shadow, not as metaphor, but as reality. A part of your psyche made up of all the things you've refused to accept about yourself. Not just cruelty or lust or rage, but also power, creativity, instinct, truth. The pieces of you deemed too dangerous, too shameful, too unacceptable to belong in the light of day. And so you banished them, or thought you did. But the shadow doesn't die when you deny it. It grows, in silence, in darkness, in the underground places of your soul. It waits, unseen, until you're vulnerable, tired, drunk, grieving, afraid, and then it steps forward. That's when you say the thing you didn't mean to say. That's when you hurt the person you love. That's when you lose control and something colder, sharper, older rises in your place. You've seen this in others. The friend who turns cruel when insecure. The lover who disappears when things get deep. The parent who lashes out in the name of care. You've seen it in yourself, and then you feel the shame. But Jung would stop you there. Shame is not the end. It's the beginning. Because shame shows you where the shadow lives. And where there is shadow, there is also an invitation. Not to destroy it, not to suppress it further, but to know it. To look directly into the part of you that terrifies you, and to ask it, why are you here? Most people never ask. They distract, they drink, they work, they scroll, they fight shadows in other people, never realizing the war is internal. The things they hate in others are often the things they've hidden in themselves. And the longer they refuse to look, the more powerful the shadow becomes. It doesn't just show up in your personal life. It shapes your relationships, your work, your beliefs. It slips into your voice, into your choices, into your silence. And the scariest part, you can live your whole life thinking you are your ego, your good intentions, your polished mask, while the shadow runs the show beneath the surface. This is why Jung said, if an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected and is liable to burst forth suddenly in a moment of unawareness. In other words, what you won't admit will eventually act without your permission. This is not just psychology, it's prophecy, it's a warning, not in fear, but in truth. Because the shadow is not your enemy, it's the part of you that got exiled in order to survive, the part that got silenced to make you lovable, the part that learned it was safer to be good than to be whole. And now, it wants to come home. It will not knock politely, it will erupt, it will confuse you, it will wear the faces of those you can't stand, it will rise in your dreams, your conflicts, your numbness. It will make sure you feel its presence, not to punish you, to invite you, because there is no light without shadow, and no self without integration. You cannot evolve by cutting away what you are. You evolve by bringing it in, by letting the shadow speak, by letting it name what you've never had the courage to say aloud, by offering it a seat at your table. Not control, but presence. Not domination, but dialogue. This is the start. You carry a shadow. It is not a flaw, it is a fact. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, you are willing to see it. You tell yourself it's not there. You keep your tone kind, your movements measured, your words precise. You walk through the world as though you've left the dark behind, but it's never behind, it walks beside you. And the more you pretend not to notice it, the closer it leans in. Carl Jung didn't say the shadow was something rare. He said it was inevitable, human, constant. The only real question is, will you know it or will it know you before you do? Because the truth is, you've been taught to fear it. Maybe it started in childhood, when anger was punished, or desire was shamed. Maybe you learned that sadness made you a burden, that ambition made you selfish, that standing up for yourself was aggression. So you buried these qualities, not because they were wrong, but because they were unsafe. The child you once were didn't have the strength to hold contradiction, so it chose survival over authenticity. You did what we all do. You created a version of yourself the world could accept. And in the process you split. One part stepped into the light, into praise, approval, identity. The other disappeared into shadow. And what you buried didn't vanish. It hardened. It watched. It learned your rhythms. And now as an adult it surfaces when you least expect it. That moment you go silent instead of setting a boundary. That rage that flashes through your voice when you're under pressure. That quiet dread when you're alone with your thoughts. All of it, your shadow, calling. Jung called the personal shadow the thing a person has no wish to be. It's what you deny, dismiss, and disown. But denial doesn't delete, it deforms. It warps healthy instinct into sabotage. It turns emotional honesty into mood swings. It turns your power into resentment. And the more you avoid it, the more you project it. You start to see in others what you won't admit in yourself. The selfishness, the weakness, the coldness, the arrogance. You name it out there, so you don't have to face it in here. It's easier to judge than to integrate, easier to resent than to feel. But each judgment, each dismissal is a signpost pointing inward. Because what bothers you most in others usually mirrors the parts of you you've silenced. You say they're too loud, but maybe you're the one who's never spoken up. You say she's manipulative, but maybe you've spent your life twisting yourself into shapes just to be loved. You say he's so full of himself, but maybe you've denied your own worth so long his confidence feels like a threat. The shadow is subtle. It's clever. It doesn't announce itself. It waits in the background of your life, in every discomfort, every irrational trigger, every unexplained guilt. It shows itself when you're under stress, when you drink too much, when you're sick, when you're sleep deprived. The shadow doesn't need your permission. It only needs a crack in your control. And when it takes over, you may not even know it. You'll call it being tired. You'll call it being off. But Jung would call it unintegrated material, the emotional energy that was meant to be felt, not buried. And this is why shadow work is not just reflection. It's confrontation. You have to look at what you've run from. You have to name the parts of you that scare you. The pettiness, the cruelty, the envy, the fear of being ordinary, the hunger for validation, the need to be right, the moments when you wanted to hurt, to hide, to lie, to disappear. None of this makes you bad. It makes you human. You've simply never been taught how to be whole. You've been taught how to be good, how to be liked, how to win approval. But goodness without wholeness is a costume. It hides you from yourself. And the longer you wear it, the more you forget there's a real person underneath. But the shadow doesn't forget. It watches every choice you make that's not aligned with your truth. It holds every yes you said when you meant no. It collects every smile that was meant to cover shame, and eventually, it begins to speak. Sometimes in dreams, sometimes in reactions, sometimes in silence so deep it drowns out your joy. You cannot cut this part out. You can only invite it back in, not to control you, but to complete you. Because that's the secret Jung gave us. The shadow isn't just the dark, it's also the gold. It holds your lost instincts, your forgotten strengths, your buried creativity, your unclaimed voice. When you reclaim it, your life expands. You stop shrinking to fit an image. You stop fearing your own truth. You begin to show up, not as the version of you that's safe, but as the version that's real. That's the work, not to become perfect, to become whole. To let the darkness be seen so the light can be true. To stand in front of your shadow, not with fear but with willingness, and say, I see you. You're mine. Let's begin again. It's a strange kind of relief when you finally realize that the person you're angry with isn't really the problem. It's not their words, or their behavior, or even their flaws. It's what they represent, what they mirror, what they awaken in you that you've spent a lifetime trying to ignore. This is the mechanism Jung warned us about with quiet precision: projection. Projection is the lie you tell yourself about others. so you don't have to face the truth about yourself. It happens so fast, so seamlessly, that you believe the emotion is justified. You meet someone and feel immediate dislike. You blame it on their attitude, their tone, their energy. But if you look closely, you'll see a deeper truth. What you dislike in them is something you've disowned in yourself, a quality you exiled, a part of your personality you judged and buried. And now, it returns, not as memory, as judgment. You're not reacting to them. You're reacting to your shadow, wearing their face. This is the trap. And it's everywhere. You call someone arrogant, but what you really can't handle is the part of you that wants to take up space. You call someone needy, but what you've truly rejected is your own vulnerability. You mock someone's spirituality, their creativity, their confidence, but what you're mocking is your own hunger to live with that much freedom. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But few are brave enough to trace the emotion back to its source, because it's easier to be right than to be real. It's easier to condemn than to feel. It's easier to live in a world where you are always the hero and others are always the problem. But this world is made of mirrors, and every emotional overreaction is a reflection, an invitation to turn inward, to ask, what am I seeing in them that I haven't faced in myself? This doesn't mean others aren't flawed. They are. We all are. But shadow projection has a flavor. It's hot. It's irrational. It doesn't feel grounded in reality. It burns in your chest. It lingers. It follows you. You obsess over it. You replay the interaction. You can't let it go. That's how you know it's yours. Because if it wasn't personal, it wouldn't echo. It would land and pass. But when it hits something you've buried, it sticks. And if you ignore it, it builds. Projection is the unconscious trying to show you the work you haven't done. It's your shadow saying, look, there I am, you still don't see me. And this isn't just about resentment. It's also about infatuation, admiration, obsession. The same way you demonize the parts of you you reject, you also worship the parts you haven't yet claimed. You meet someone and think they're magic, but what you're seeing is your own magic, reflected back. You don't just project the bad, you project the good too. The strength you've denied, the charisma you've hidden, the sensuality you've buried. It's all in there. And it terrifies you, because to reclaim it, you'd have to change. You'd have to confront the narrative you've built about who you are and what you're allowed to be. And that would threaten the image you've protected for years. But until you do that, you'll keep chasing people who hold your power, and you'll keep pushing away people who threaten your illusion. Projection is not just a psychological concept, it's a spiritual emergency. It tells you where the fractures are. It shows you where the gold is buried. And when you learn to recognize it, your entire experience of others changes. You stop blaming, you start inquiring, you stop pointing fingers, you start asking questions. What does this person awaken in me? Why does this behavior make me so uncomfortable? What part of me have I judged so harshly that I can't stand to see it in someone else? This is not about self-blame, it's about self-responsibility. You are not responsible for how others behave, but you are responsible for what you do with your reactions. Because every reaction is a message, from the shadow, from the unconscious, from the part of you that's still waiting to come home. Projection doesn't mean the person in front of you is innocent, but it does mean the fire you feel belongs to you. And if you follow the flame, it will lead you to something sacred. A wound you can finally heal. A strength you can finally own. A part of yourself you can finally love. So the next time you feel the heat, pause. Don't judge. Don't justify. Listen. The shadow is speaking, and it's using their face to get your attention. It's easy to think of the shadow as only darkness, the rage, the envy, the bitterness, the things you suppress to seem kind, the things you deny to feel safe. But that's only half the story. Jung knew better. He knew the shadow wasn't just a container for what we fear. It's also the hiding place for what we once loved in ourselves and lost. There's gold in your darkness. Not metaphorical gold. Real value. Real light. Real life. When you were young, before the world told you who you were allowed to be, you moved through the world with all of you present. You were angry when you were hurt. You danced when you were joyful. You asked questions that made others uncomfortable. You said what you thought before you learned which thoughts were acceptable. And then you began to adapt. You learned that sensitivity made people roll their eyes, that boldness got you punished, that curiosity made you annoying, that asking for what you wanted made you selfish. So you carved those parts out, bit by bit. You didn't mean to erase yourself. You just didn't want to be alone. You wanted love, approval, safety, and the fastest way to get it was to become someone else. But the cost? Wholeness. The parts you disowned didn't vanish. They went underground, into the shadow. And now, as an adult, you feel it, the gap between who you are and who you could be. You struggle to speak up, even when you know you should. You feel creative impulses, but second-guess them until they vanish. You long for passion, but you've numbed yourself to avoid its risks. This isn't failure, it's fragmentation. And the good news? Everything you lost is still within you. Jung wrote that the shadow displays normal instincts, appropriate reactions, realistic insights, creative impulses. These aren't flaws, they're strengths. But because they've been wrapped in shame, you don't recognize them anymore. You think your assertiveness is aggression. You think your sadness is weakness. You think your excitement is immaturity. So you keep shrinking and shrinking and shrinking until you hardly recognize your own reflection. But the gold is still there, buried beneath every I shouldn't, waiting behind every I'm not allowed, alive inside every moment you felt fully yourself, then made yourself smaller. The process of shadow work isn't just about confronting your demons. It's about reclaiming your buried treasure. The voice you silenced because someone once told you it was too much. It might be the voice that changes your life. The anger you suppressed because it made people uncomfortable. It might be the boundary you need to protect your soul. The wildness you locked away because it didn't fit the mold. It might be the key to your joy. We spend so much time fixing what's broken, we forget to uncover what's been hidden. Your light didn't leave you, you left it, to survive, to be loved, and now you're strong enough to return. But that return is not about reclaiming your old self, it's about integrating what was lost into who you are now. It's about giving your younger self what they never had, permission to be full, to be angry without being cruel, to be soft without being crushed, to be powerful without apology. That's what the gold in the shadow is, untapped potential, honest vitality, real intelligence, unlived truth. And the only way to find it is to go where you've refused to look. That's the paradox. The parts of you you feared the most may be the ones you've needed all along. So you stop running. You stop performing. You stop calling your instincts inconvenient. You turn around and face the dark. And there it is, not a monster, a mirror, showing you everything you thought you had to throw away in order to be good. And when you pick it up, gently, quietly, with reverence, you start to remember, this was mine. It always was, and I am ready to carry it again. Sometimes the shadow speaks softly. It doesn't roar, it whispers. It waits in dreams, in quiet hesitations, in the space between what you say and what you mean. You think you're over it, you think it's behind you. But then you wake from a dream, shaken, ashamed, unable to shake the image that found you in sleep. Or someone says something innocent, and your body reacts like it's been hit. The blood rushes, the breath catches. You're triggered, but you don't know why. This is how the shadow speaks, not through logic, through symbols, through sensation, through the moments you cannot explain. Jung believed the unconscious is not mute, it's symbolic. And when the shadow can't get your attention in waking life, it appears in your dreams, as strangers, as animals, as threats, as versions of yourself you don't want to see. The dream self you argue with, the figure you run from, the person who tells you truths you've tried not to hear. Often, it shows up as someone of your own gender, an adversary, a judge, a reflection. It criticizes you, accuses you, embarrasses you. And when you wake, your first instinct is to forget. But something lingers. Because that wasn't just a dream. That was your psyche trying to reintroduce you to Tita T-Horn. And it doesn't stop there. The shadow also rises in your reactions. You're in conversation, everything's light, and then suddenly something shifts. A comment cuts deeper than it should. You snap, or shut down, or say something that surprises even you. That moment, that inexplicable change in temperature, is a shadow flare. You've stumbled over one of your own unconscious snags, as Jung called them. And it isn't random, it's a moment of contact. Your shadow touching your surface. When these moments come, most people do one of two things. They either blame the other person, or they blame themselves. But neither brings healing. What's needed isn't blame, it's curiosity. Ask, why did that hit me so hard? What belief was challenged? What part of me felt seen, too seen? Because buried inside every overreaction is a message. The shadow doesn't rise for no reason. It rises to reveal what's still waiting to be integrated. Jung saw this inner critic not as an enemy, but as a guide. The voice that judges you isn't always there to harm. It may be trying to hold you accountable, to show you where you're betraying yourself. But when you're not listening, it becomes harsh, punitive, shaming, because it's been ignored too long. You silence your instincts to keep the peace. You suppress your opinions to be likable. You hide your emotions to seem strong. And your shadow watches, not to punish you, to remind you, to tell you you are not being honest with yourself, and it will do whatever it takes to break that spell. The result? You start to feel uneasy in your own skin. You look calm, but inside you're tight. You move through life on edge, like something is always just beneath the surface. And there is. It's you, the rest of you, the full you, the real you, trying to return. We call this discomfort many names: anxiety, imposter syndrome, burnout, depression. But sometimes it's just the cost of not being whole. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants you to stop destroying yourself, through silence, through denial, through the slow abandonment of your truth. This is why dreams matter. This is why emotional reactions matter. This is why you must listen to the parts of you you've trained yourself to ignore. Because they are not here to ruin your life. They are here to save it. There is wisdom in the part of you that's been cast out. Wisdom in your anger. Wisdom in your fear. Wisdom in your shame. Not because these things are fun to feel, but because they tell you where you still need healing. And healing doesn't mean turning those feelings off. It means letting them speak long enough to feel heard. You don't need to obey them. You don't need to let them run your life. But you do need to let them exist. That's how you reclaim the pieces of yourself that broke off when you were too young to protect them. And when you do, you stop being ruled by unconscious behavior. You stop projecting your pain onto others. You stop fearing your own truth. Because now you're listening. Now you're learning to feel again. And in feeling, you begin to remember who you were before you became a stranger to yourself. By now you understand that the shadow isn't just an abstract concept. It's your lived experience. It's not philosophical theory. It's the shape of your guilt, the echo of your anger, the quiet ache that follows you into every room. Jung never said this work would be easy. He compared it to the labors of Hercules, slow, painful, and deeply human. This is shadow work, the work of self-retrieval, the psychological journey of bringing the unconscious into the light, not with violence but with honesty. And it begins where you are right now, with willingness, not mastery, not certainty, just the willingness to look inward and say, what have I refused to know about myself? This is not a task you complete in a weekend. It's not a journal prompt or a checklist. Shadow work is lifelong, it's cyclical. Some days you will feel clarity, and others you will feel like you're unraveling. This is the process of integration, not perfection. Because the goal is never to eliminate the shadow. The goal is to stop pretending it's not there. You begin by watching your reactions. You let yourself feel triggered, and instead of blaming or withdrawing, you ask, what part of me is speaking right now? You observe your judgments, of others, of yourself, and ask, what in me feels threatened? You listen to your dreams, not as nonsense, but as symbols. Every figure, every landscape, every confrontation is a message, a fragment of your psyche trying to reintroduce itself to you. And above all, you tell the truth, not performative truth, raw truth. You admit the envy, the pride, the addiction to control, the need to be right, the parts of you that manipulate, that avoid, that punish, that crave power. You name them, you breathe with them. You stop running from what is already a part of you. This is the painful part, because there's a version of yourself you've built, polished, curated, appropriate, and shadow work shatters that image. It humbles you, and it frees you. You realize that your kindness was sometimes rooted in fear, not love, that your independence was often a mask for abandonment wounds, that your strength was silence, that your wisdom was suppression, that your peace was detachment. You don't hate yourself for this. You forgive yourself. Because this is what survival once required. And now your soul is asking for more. Not more rules. Not more roles. More truth. More integration. To stop living as fragments. To gather all of yourself, even the pieces you once called unworthy. To stop apologizing for being complex. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That's what you're doing. You're sitting in the dark, not to suffer, but to see. You're not trying to fix yourself, you're trying to know yourself. This work does not make you morally pure. It makes you whole. You will still get triggered, you will still fail, you will still forget. But now, you know the way back. You begin to catch the projection before it damages someone you love. You begin to see the fear underneath your resistance. You begin to spot the pattern before it repeats. And slowly something shifts. You soften. You become honest, not just with others, but with yourself. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You stop hiding your wants. You stop outsourcing your worth to other people's approval. And when the shadow speaks, you don't run. You sit beside it. You say, "I hear you." That's when the real change begins. Not as transformation, but as reunion. You don't become someone new. You return to someone old, someone honest, someone who was there before the fracture, someone still whole beneath the roles. The you who didn't yet know shame, the you who felt it all and survived. That part of you still remembers how to be real. And that's what shadow work is, a return to what was never lost, only buried. So when the shame rises, breathe. When the guilt whispers, pause. When the dream confuses you, listen. When the reaction surprises you, stay curious. Don't turn it into a story. Don't turn it into self-hate. Turn it into inquiry. Turn it into a doorway. Because beneath every shadow is a key. And now you're brave enough to use it. It would be easier if the shadow ended with you. If this work were purely personal. If you could keep your darkness neatly contained in your own chest, never spilling into the world around you. But Carl Jung saw something much more dangerous, much more collective. The shadow that lives not just in individuals, but in cultures, in institutions, in entire civilizations. He called it the collective shadow. The dark side of society, the repressed truths of history, the denied guilt of nations. And just like the personal shadow, the collective shadow becomes most dangerous when it's ignored. You've seen it, you've felt it, in the violence that feels normal, in the inequalities that feel permanent, in the casual cruelty passed off as policy, in the numbness people carry when discussing suffering that doesn't touch them directly, in the way we turn atrocities into statistics and call that awareness. Jung understood, when a society refuses to look at its own darkness, it projects it outward. It creates enemies, it scapegoats. It builds entire narratives to justify its blindness. It says, they are the problem, they are uncivilized, they are evil. But they is just the shadow wearing another face. This is the architecture of war, of oppression, of systemic harm. And it always starts with repression. When a culture decides what is unacceptable, it doesn't eliminate that energy, it displaces it, it pushes it into the unconscious of the collective. And just like in the individual, the more that shadow is ignored, the more violently it returns. In racism, in authoritarianism, in genocide, in ecological destruction, in cultural erasure. Jung believed that evil arises not because individuals are inherently monstrous, but because individuals refuse to face their own darkness, and instead merge with mass movements that allow them to act it out unconsciously. Think of Nazi Germany. Jung called it a collective psychosis. Ordinary people became perpetrators, not because they were evil to begin with, but because their personal shadows fused with a collective shadow that gave them permission to disown their humanity. This is what happens when the shadow is not integrated. It becomes contagious. People fall under its spell. They commit horrors they could never have imagined under normal conditions. They surrender their conscience to the group, and the shadow triumphs, not as an external force, but as the eruption of everything denied. You may not be marching under banners, but the collective shadow still lives in you. It shows up in how you talk about others. It shows up in what you choose to ignore. It shows up in the discomfort you feel when certain histories are brought up. It shows up in what you dismiss as not your problem. And this is not about blame. This is about responsibility. Because you're not separate from the collective. You're a thread in its fabric. And the more you do your own shadow work, the more resilient that fabric becomes. When you integrate your own shame, you stop projecting it onto strangers. When you face your own capacity for harm, you stop pretending harm only exists out there. When you own your own history, you create space for others to speak theirs. This is how personal healing becomes collective healing. Not through grand gestures, but through honesty, through presence, through the courage to look at what has been hidden, not just in your life, but in your lineage, in your culture, in your country, in your community. And when you see it, you don't run, you stay, you witness. You ask, what have we refused to acknowledge? What pain has been passed down because no one had the courage to name it? What do I benefit from that someone else suffers for? These questions are dangerous. They disrupt comfort. But Jung would say, comfort is not the goal. Wholeness is. And wholeness at the collective level looks like truth. It looks like grieving together. It looks like dismantling illusions that once kept us safe but now keep us divided. It looks like refusing to participate in unconscious violence, even if it's socially accepted, even if it's legal, even if it's lucrative, even if it's easy. Because the collective shadow will not heal itself. It must be brought into the light. And you are the light bearer, not by being perfect, but by being awake, by doing your own inner work so that you don't unconsciously feed the systems that profit from your denial. You don't have to carry the world, but you do have to carry your part, because the shadow we ignore today becomes the history our descendants are forced to relive. And they are watching, just as we have watched those before us. Let your life be an interruption in that cycle. Let your honesty ripple outward. Let your healing become a threshold through which others pass into truth. You don't live in a vacuum. Your inner world, your inner chaos, your quiet avoidance, they don't just affect you. They spill, they echo, they ripple outward. This is what Jung meant when he said that the personal shadow left unresolved becomes the bridge to the collective shadow. That the war you refuse to face in your own soul becomes the war you unconsciously participate in, even as you claim to stand against it. We imagine history as something that happens to other people, dictators, soldiers, institutions. But history begins in the psyche. It begins in fear unspoken, in shame repressed, in small acts of silence that become the groundwork for mass forgetting. You think you are just one person, but one person denying their truth is enough to shape a household. One household living in suppression creates a culture of avoidance, and a culture that avoids its own shadow becomes complicit in atrocities without ever lifting a hand. The cruelty we see in the world isn't born in darkness. It's born in light that refused to turn and face the dark. That's why Jung insisted that inner work isn't a luxury. It's a responsibility. The pain you avoid doesn't just hurt you, it gets passed on through your choices, your parenting, your leadership, your silence. Because shadow is contagious. If you don't make it conscious, it spreads through your life like smoke, hiding your intentions, twisting your clarity, stealing your presence. You smile, but something's missing. You speak, but something feels hollow. You love, but not all the way. And others feel it. They sense the distance, the guardedness, the performance. Even if they don't know what it is, they know something isn't whole. And this is how the chain continues. Generation after generation of unspoken pain, of anger dressed as discipline, of shame disguised as tradition, of silence mistaken for peace. But it doesn't have to continue. The work of integration begins with a single decision. I will not pass this on. That doesn't mean you'll get it all right. It means you'll stop pretending. You'll say what was never said in your family. You'll grieve what your culture never allowed you to grieve. You'll remember what society taught you to forget. And in doing so, you become the threshold. You become the interruption. The one who chooses to stop living someone else's narrative. The one who refuses to perform the unspoken script. The one who says, this ends with me. This is what it means to reclaim your shadow. Not to master it, but to bring it into relationship. To know it so well that it no longer controls you from the dark. To make space for your complexity, so others no longer have to carry your denied parts for you. Because when you disown your aggression, it finds its way into your relationships. When you disown your envy, it taints your praise. When you disown your need, it shows up as control. You think you're managing it, but you're leaking. and the world is absorbing it. That's why the personal is political. That's why healing isn't selfish. Because a single integrated human creates less harm than 1,000 wounded ones pretending to be fine. When you do your shadow work, you change how you show up in every room. You speak, but no longer from fear. You listen, but no longer from defensiveness. You lead, but no longer from superiority. You relate, but no longer from projection. You become clear, not perfect, not pure, just real. And that realness liberates others. You give them permission to feel what they've buried, to say what they've never dared, to question what they were told was sacred. This is how a person becomes a movement. Not by shouting louder, but by becoming quieter inside, by rooting themselves so deeply in truth that they cannot be manipulated by fear. So tonight, ask yourself, what am I carrying that doesn't belong to me? And what am I passing on without realizing? These are not small questions. They're the beginning of a new legacy. Not of perfection, but of consciousness. And that consciousness, that tiny quiet fire inside you, is how the world begins to heal, one human at a time. Starting with you, we live in a world that moves quickly to forget, to bury, to edit, to sanitize. It tells us to move on, to let go, to stop dwelling. But Jung would tell you, what you refuse to face, you are doomed to repeat, not as punishment, but as pattern. And this is the nature of the shadow, personal and collective. It returns until it is seen, it repeats until it is integrated, it haunts until it is heard. So what does it really mean to remember? Not just history, not just events, but feeling. Embodiment. The visceral truth of what happened, not just to others but through you. To remember is not nostalgia, it is not indulgence, it is resistance. Because memory is how the shadow is named, and naming is how it loses power. Truth-telling is the beginning of healing. Not to assign guilt, not to weaponize pain, but to reclaim the parts of ourselves and our cultures that were forced underground. This is true in families, in nations, in your own soul. And truth-telling isn't just verbal, it's energetic, it's emotional. It's about the willingness to stay in the discomfort long enough for the illusion to break. Because without truth, there is no closure. And without closure, the wound becomes identity. This is what happens in cultures that repress their collective shadow. They wear the wound, they build systems around it. They pretend progress has been made when the foundation still rots. And eventually, the pain resurfaces, not as clarity, but as chaos. We've seen this throughout history, and Jung saw it too. He watched entire countries slip into sosis not because they were evil, but because they were unconscious, because they had forgotten their own capacity for destruction, because they believed their own myth of innocence. And here's the terrifying truth, it doesn't take much. One crisis, one charismatic leader, one shared enemy, and the shadow rises. You've seen this in your own life, haven't you? When stress comes, when fear spikes, your old patterns return. The version of you thought was gone comes back. You react, you retreat, you lash out, you protect, you regress. And if you haven't done the work, you convince yourself this is just who you are. But it isn't. It's who you were, unexamined. It's your shadow, unsupervised. The same thing happens to societies. Without collective integration, the past repeats. And not just in obvious ways. Sometimes it returns as indifference, as silence, as apathy disguised as maturity. So how do we stop the cycle? By remembering what we're tempted to forget, by speaking the unspeakable, by telling the truth before it demands to be screamed. This is not glamorous work, it's painful, embarrassing, exhausting, but it's the only way forward. And it has to happen collectively. Not just through political leaders, but through you, through communities. Through conversations that shake the walls. Through the courage to name the pain that lives in your lineage, your neighborhood, your skin. Because the only way the shadow loses its grip is if it is spoken. Not just acknowledged, not just awareness, spoken, named, held, accounted for. That means apology, that means reparation. Not always financial, but emotional, spiritual, cultural. That means dismantling the stories that told you who the enemy is. That means seeing the shadow not just in history books, but in headlines, in policies, in language, in silence. And that means asking the hard questions. What have we denied? Who has paid the price for our forgetting? What truths have we made too expensive to speak? And what would it take to make remembering sacred again? Jung believed that redemption was possible, but only if you are willing to tell the truth. Truth about your past, truth about your culture, truth about your own capacity for cruelty and grace. He said the individual must know relentlessly how much good he can do and what crimes he is capable of. That is wholeness, not the absence of darkness, but the presence of awareness. And when you live from that place, not perfect, but present, you become the antidote to repetition. You become the crack in the cycle. You become the one who remembers, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's unpopular, even when others ask you to forget. Because you know now, you've felt it. The shadow only grows blacker when it's ignored. And you've made a vow to yourself, to the world, not to turn away again. You've come this far, and now the question isn't whether the shadow exists. It's whether you'll carry it consciously, or let it carry you, again and again, through lives and choices you don't recognize as your own. Jung never promised comfort. He promised depth. And the path to depth is lined with things you'd rather not see, memories, habits, unclaimed parts of your voice, your body, your rage. But this, he said, is the only path that leads anywhere real. So let's not pretend anymore. You know what you've avoided. You've called it timing, trauma, other people's fault. But beneath every excuse is something raw. The simple, devastating truth that you're afraid of what you'll become if you finally feel it. The pain, the need, the power, the grief, the hunger, the history. You think it will undo you. But what if it saves you? Because what's destroying you is not your darkness. It's the distance you've kept from it. You've lived in pieces, and you've made it look graceful. People call you calm, but inside it's hollow. People call you wise, but you've forgotten how to feel. People call you successful, but you know how much of yourself you left behind to get here. And still, it's not too late, because the shadow isn't a punishment. It's a homecoming. It's the truth you buried so well, even you forgot it was sacred. You were never meant to be only light. You were never meant to be pure, clean, curated. You were meant to be full, real, honest, alive. But fullness is scary when you've lived in halfness for so long. So start small. Tell the truth about one feeling you've silenced. Cry for something you convinced yourself you should be over by now. Admit one place where you've been cruel because you were afraid. Ask one question about your ancestry you were told not to ask. Let yourself be seen by the one person who scares you most, yourself. This is where the shift begins. It won't be dramatic, it won't be viral, but one day something inside you will relax. Something ancient, something tight, something that's been clenching since you were a child. And when it does, you'll realize you're not fighting anymore, you're not hiding, you're just being. And being is enough. Jung said there's no light without shadow, and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. The goal isn't to be clean. The goal is to be complete. That means making room for your contradictions, for your softness and your fury, for your ambition and your despair, for the parts of you that want to love and the parts that still don't know how. It means carrying your darkness like a sacred object, not flaunting it, not denying it, but knowing it, so that no one else has to carry it for you. That's the work, not just for your own healing, but for the people around you who feel the impact of the unspoken. For your children who inherit your silence unless you choose to speak. For your partners who feel the weight of your shame whether you name it or not. For your community who suffers or heals based on your courage to face yourself. You don't do shadow work to be impressive. You do it to be clean enough on the inside to love without harm, to lead without projection, to touch without fear, and to leave something behind that isn't a mask, but a map, a way back home for anyone who got lost pretending they had to be good instead of whole. So let this be the moment, the beginning of your return. You don't have to finish tonight, you just have to stop turning away. Look into the dark. Let your eyes adjust. You'll find that the face staring back is familiar. It's not monstrous, it's just you. The parts of you that were waiting, the truths you buried under performance, the gold wrapped in shame. They're here, and they're not asking for perfection. They're asking for presence, for courage, for one moment of honesty that says, I see you. You're not too much, you're not too late, you are mine, and I am ready. Let your breath slow now. Let the weight of everything you've faced settle gently in your chest, not as pressure, but as presence. There is no rush, no judgment, only this moment, this breath, this quiet. You've done something sacred to not by fixing but by feeling, by staying, by witnessing what was once too difficult to name. Let the stillness hold you. You don't have to understand it all yet. You don't have to act. Just let the words echo where they need to. Let the silence soften your edges. You've already begun. The deepest kind of healing happens not through effort, but through surrender. Surrender to what is true. Surrender to what wants to return. Your shadow is not here to harm you. It is here to reunite you with the self you left behind. And tonight, you said yes. So close your eyes, let your body rest. And remember, you are no longer alone in the dark, because now you've brought a light with you. And that light is you.